Star Trek episodes were budgeted at about $180,000 each and were scheduled to take 6 days to shoot. And more often than not, we'd run over budget and behind schedule. Gene Roddenberry saw a way to get ahead. The original pilot episode, The Cage, which had cost $600,000 to produce, had never been aired. NBC thought it was too cerebral. If only Roddenberry could add action to it. So what he came up with was a two-parter that would incorporate The Cage within a larger story. He called it The Menagerie. Here is part 2. Jeffrey Hunter was unavailable to play the disabled Captain Pike. The part was eventually played by Sean Kenny, who looked a lot like Hunter but wore the disfiguring makeup to avoid direct comparison. The voice of the Keeper, originally supplied by actor Malachi Throne, had to be redubbed when Throne was picked to play Commodore Mendez.
I think one of the reasons fans like to engage with Star Trek, and here talking about the original classic Trek, is that it wasn't perfect, and fans and all of the hundreds and thousands of fanzine stories that have been written try to go in there and fix what they see as the gaps and the contradictions, the misogyny, the unconscious racism that's there in Star Trek.
Oh, have I introduced Miss Piper, Jim? This is Captain Kirk, Miss Piper.
I recognized the captain immediately. A mutual friend described you, sir, Lieutenant Helen Johansson.
So they just want to take something that's already good and just make it as good as it could be. If it had just had the nerve to go it a little further, if it had just had the guts, for example, to actually put a woman in the spot as number 1, which
nothing will be said.
Roddenberry did at first, but then under pressure said that we cannot have a number 1 who is a woman.
Engineering deck will rig the transmit ship's power. We'll try blasting through that metal.
My first involvement, had to be, of course, with Gene and through Gene. He wrote the part of number 1 first. And then he said, there, are you happy? He wrote the description of number 1, and then he wrote the character. So, I mean, the part was always mine right from the beginning.
All circuits engaged, Mr. Spock.
Standing by, number 1.
Take cover.
I had taken for granted that back in 1964, if a woman was in command of a spaceship, she was. I was just that kind of a person and an actress, and I loved the chance. I didn't think about her being a woman in that place. I mean, she was just another officer. And that was, I think, the purpose of trying to meld all of these characters together, that it wasn't pointed out as being a woman. It was another character that was going to be there. It was basically as simple as that.
Sorry, number 1. For little information on this planet, we'll have to leave the ship's most experienced officer here covering us.
Of course, sir.
Well, they said in the testing, they came back with all of the tests that said that the public resented a female in the position second in command of a starship, and felt that it was totally unbelievable. They said this couldn't happen. No woman could handle this part. And that was the end of the story. Said get rid of her.
So what the fans do when they rewrite stories, they just go in there and they make number 1 a woman. And they give Uhuru a lot more lines than just hailing frequencies open.
Very well.
To begin with, I did The Lieutenant, which was an early Gene Roddenberry series. And I was my first real casting job because I was a clerk in the office, and the guy that was doing the show got sick. And so I just filled in temporarily. Gene fired him and kept me. And so Gene and I ended up with this great rapport because he knew nothing about actors. And he'd just say, what'll I do? Who shall I hire? When he went to Desilu, I wasn't part of the team. I was at Fox. And they didn't hire a casting director, but they had Gene's assistant was doing most of the casting. Called me up, said, we're in trouble. I said, I've got a job. So what I would do is give him a list of actors for each of the parts, and then send it over there, and they'd call the people out. And then they'd start to break it down, and then we would discuss. Turns out Leonard Nimoy had done a lieutenant.
Captain Pike, may I remain for a moment?
I was just looking for tall, skinny guys for a Vulcan who had some kind of menace to them, and Leonard was just one of a bunch of guys.
Sir, contact with an object.
George Ty had done a lieutenant. Nichelle Nichols had done a lieutenant. So most of the casting was from the previous series.
Well, you all know the situation. We're hoping to transport down inside the Telosian community.
Major Barrett was a friend of Gene's at the time. DeForest Kelley was an actor who had worked on a Ziv police movies, those B movies, of which Gene Roddenberry was a technical advisor because he was a cop at the time and a fledgling, he was beginning to write.
We're discussing tactics. Do you realize what this really comes down to? Millions and millions of lives hanging on what this vessel does next.
Or on what this vessel fails to do, Doctor.
Yes, well, gentlemen, the question still remains. Can we engage them with a reasonable possibility of victory?
And Shatner was like a very prestigious, up-and-coming actor in those days with his appearance in Judgment at Nuremberg.
Someone's interfering with my command and my ship. I don't know who it is, but I mean to find out. Even you.
He was a network choice because his series was canceled. Network didn't like Jeffrey for whatever reason, which I don't think I ever knew the reason, and they just replaced him. And I was still at Fox at this time. And it's when they picked up the show with Shatner and not Jeffrey, they called me up and asked me if I'd come over and head casting for them.
The Menagerie is Star Trek's only two-part episode. It won the prestigious Hugo Award for dramatic presentation from the World Science Fiction Convention in 1967. The same year, Robert Heinlein won the award for his novel, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. The following year, Star Trek won it again for The City on the Edge of Forever, and Gene Roddenberry was given a Special Achievement Award. Not bad for a TV series that was almost dropped by the network.
Part 1 of The Menagerie left us with Mr. Spock facing charges of mutiny. Having stolen the Enterprise and kidnapped his former commander, Captain Christopher Pike, Spock is facing a court-martial. The evidence he presents, images from the past being transmitted from a forbidden world. That contact alone could end his Starfleet career. And if the Enterprise reaches Telos, Spock will be on trial for his very life. Gene Roddenberry created The Menagerie as a framework to get the previously unaired pilot, The Cage, on the screen. NBC had rejected The Cage back in 1965, claiming that it was too cerebral. By creating the fiction of a court-martial around the footage from the pilot, Gene turned a cerebral story into an emotional one. It must have worked. The Menagerie won the 1966 Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation. Here's a story for you. A loyal member of the crew hijacks the Enterprise to bring an injured comrade to a place where he can find rest and rejuvenation. In doing so, this crew member risks everything, his career, his life, all out of friendship and loyalty. That's the story of The Menagerie, right? Well, it also happens to be the story of Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. One of the ideas that always appealed to me about the original series was the commitment that the Enterprise's crew demonstrated to each other. That commitment was demonstrated in the crew's willingness to risk everything for Spock in Star Trek III, the same way that Spock risked everything for his former captain in The Menagerie.